Welcome to the Midlife Men podcast with me, Philip Briscoe. My guest today is Patrick Sperry, certified Iyengar yoga teacher, founder of Flourish Well-Being, a professional wellness coach, and in his own words, heart-centered ecstatic. So welcome, Patrick.
Philip, thank you for having me, my friend. It's really a blessing to be here.
So, Patrick, I know you grew up in Chicago, and I know you achieved success in sports and music. So tell us more about your early years.
Well, Philip, I was the golden boy, and I could do no wrong. So I was a middle child in a comfortable suburban town outside of Chicago, and I had big dreams ever since I was a child, and they were reinforced by a certain level of heroism in success. Peak moments when I was a kid were like hitting grand slam home runs in the World Series final in order to clear the bases and win the game. So along with my visions of grandeur and of what was possible, I seemed to do amazing things, which kind of prodded me to believe that anything was possible. And it was good. I was successful at a young age playing soccer. I had some time with the U.S. national team as the goalkeeper for the under 14 men's U.S. national team, which brought me to places like Costa Rica and Brazil and the U.K. to play soccer at a very high level. And at the same time, I was passionate about music. And that's kind of like my dual life, is the competitive athlete and the creative introvert who would slip down into the basement and write love songs all night, which was in some way my form of processing my life and my therapy. My father was really involved in my athletics, and he was always there. He was really devoted, and at the same time, sometimes overbearing. So I found some retreat and some kind of personal ownership of my life through the process of songwriting. But playing in a band and playing soccer full time as a kid and having an easy, comfortable life in Chicago.
What do you think were the main drivers behind that? You know, that sounds like rather unusual in terms of the level of success you achieved at a young age. What do you think? Do you think that was from inside yourself? Was it, support from your parents or your teachers?
Well, Philip, I believe that there's more than one answer to everything. And it was both this self-confidence and this self-belief and this determination, which was self-motivated on some level. But there was also this input coming, which was part of my life's problem and continues to be something that I have to work through, which is this perfectionism implanted by my father's insistence that I was the best. And he really reinforced that verbally. And what was painful about that for me was that from my father's point of view, not only was I the best in comparison to everybody else, but everybody else pretty much sucked. He would build me up, but he would simultaneously tear down the other kids who were great. And there was an interesting circumstance, a setup where I was ranked the number 5 goalkeeper in the country in my recruiting class going into university. And the number 1 goalkeeper was from Chicago, playing in the same club as me, just 1 year above. He got moved up to this really successful team, the 1985 year, and I was playing on the 86s. And my father could never recognize that this kid was great, and he was great, and I was great, and we couldn't both be great in his eyes. So that was part of, my drive to be great, was his insistence that I was, but it was painful that it was at the expense of celebrating other men. And just to kind of jump ahead a little bit, I'll plant the seed that a big part of my life now is working with men through rites of passage retreats with the intention to become mature, masculine, generative energies on the planet. And we study the 4 predominant male archetypes: the king, the warrior, the magician, and the lover. And the function of the king, in part, is to bless. And it's said that if you can't bless other men, then there's a wound there from your inner teen that never got recognition from other men or whatnot. So I practice as a remedy for my comparison and competitiveness, really seeing the best in other men and putting words to it, letting other men know that I see them, that I value their quality, and that I celebrate that.
You were kind of living the dream, really. You had this great success. And then as you grew up, did that become a burden or a pressure? How did you start to manage that?
Well, Philip, for a perfectionist, I don't know if it's ever feeling like success. It's hard to celebrate accomplishments when you're chasing the next one. So again, that's important for men who feel like maybe they're never enough, to take time to reflect on, your achievements in life. And we all feel good. Part of flourishing as a human being is having a sense of accomplishment. But if you don't pause to celebrate those accomplishments, you kind of lose that opportunity. But for me, I've always, I have this thing, which a lot of us have. It's an archetype influence called the puer eternus, which is the eternal boy. And the thing about the eternal boy is that he's always chasing the possibilities, and somehow he lives in a fantasy world and never really lands. He's the flying boy, the Peter Pan, and he needs more earth. So as I was on the cusp of graduating the University of Michigan, where I had a successful Division I soccer career, there was a path for me to play professional soccer. I was playing with the Chicago Fire, which is an MLS team, in the summertime on their developmental team. I was doing well. But I had this part of me which was seeking something else. That wasn't enough. The potential of being a famous or professional athlete was less than the possibilities of being a rock star. And I had this dream since I was a kid of touring the world. And I was good, and I had good songs, and I was a talented musician. So I chose, I had a degree in filmmaking at Michigan. So I was like, all right, well, I'm doing music. I've made up my mind. Filmmaking's in my back pocket. Let's go to Hollywood. So I left soccer, and that was really hard. I remember giving a speech at my senior banquet. I actually had one more year to go back and play at Michigan. I had played for 3 years. I had another year of eligibility. And I said, I'm out of here. And I couldn't speak at the microphone. It was just quivering and shaking. And I was unable to get words out. It was such a strong break, that piece of my life, which was super important to me up until that point. And then I went west in pursuit of what might be more. And it was a cool trip in Hollywood, 7 years or so. That's another part of my life. That part of my life showed me new ways, new possibilities. And again, I turned from my full attention being on music eventually to this spiritual path, this path of yoga and meditation and self-discovery, which in a moment became very compelling to me.
So I know you talk a bit about wanting to be the best rather than being your best, and it started to perhaps wear you down a bit. Can you elaborate a bit on that? How was that manifesting itself?
Yeah, the joy and the love of the creative process and the dance of creating art and music is very fulfilling in and of itself. And there was times in my life where I didn't want so much from music. I think in a quintessential Hindu text called the Bhagavad Gita, the truth is expounded by the Godhead Krishna, which is called Karma Yoga. And it says, do your work, but surrender the fruits of your labor to God. Show up, offer your gifts to the world, and let go. And if you do that, you avoid disappointment because you're not having so many expectations in the outcome, which ultimately you can't control. There's a lot of variables outside of yourself that influence, what happens in life. So that would be a good way to go. And I couldn't be as such. I was slowly hungry for a level of recognition and success. And I saw my peers launching into stardom and stratospheric success. And I lost patience. I lost the ability to relax into life, to enjoy the journey. And it just became like a painful thing to sit down and create and to be with music. There was times in my life when I couldn't listen to music because I was so disappointed in not being what in my mind I thought I would be or could be or wanted to be. So there's been some heartache with, how much I've wanted from life and coming down again and really choosing and being with what is real, not what you fantasize about being possible, is what needs to happen. And I think the practices of mindfulness and meditation and yoga, and there's so many different ways to access the moment is what it's needed.
So before we start talking more about your journey into yoga and then how that expanded, I do have to ask you about being David Beckham's double.
As an Englishman, Philip, I understand that. That was a cool little moment. And that was soon after I moved to Hollywood. I was looking for work and I was sitting in a cafe and this man approached me suggesting I could be a model. And I thought, well, part of me wants to be an actor. This is all part of the game. Let's get into Hollywood and see what happens. I got my first job and my agents were laughing because they said beginner's luck, which was true. It's quite competitive in Hollywood to land gigs. You're in line at audition halls with hundreds of people. And I learned that eventually. But one of my best gigs was this opportunity to be David Beckham's body double. It took a bunch of auditions. I didn't know what the role was. But at the last audition, they had me come out and play soccer. So they knew that I had this pedigree of being a high quality soccer player. So it was me versus this other guy, and this other guy had never played. So he was just bumbling over the ball and I was, ripping shots and, had a great touch. So I got the gig, and I got that gig about 3 times. So once for Samsung, once for Adidas, and once for the World Cup. And the coolest part was getting Beck's tattoos. They had this like semi-permanent tattoo process where they would lay on the full sleeves, the neck tattoo, super glue the Achilles tendon scar. And then I'd be walking around Hollywood for like 3 months with these full sleeves looking like a complete badass and getting a lot of respect as like a 22-year-old kid who was bold enough to get inked up. But he was a super sweet man. I mean, he would roll up in his entourage of 16 people. I guess he's got a hair guy that kind of never leaves his side when he's out in public to make sure he's all lined up. But he rolled up in his, platinum clad Bentley with this, big group of people following him. And he shook every person on set's hand, which was probably 75 people. I'm talking the catering company, the guys who were, running around, picking up trash. He was very humble. And I remember the first time he spoke to me, he goes, "Y'all right, mate?" He's kind of got a high voice. And I'm like, "Yes, David, I'm all right." Of course, we were dressed exactly the same and I had his tattoos on. So that was cool, as a footballer growing up, watching that golden era of Manchester United and being a big Becks fan. My sister was a huge Spice Girls fan, so a bit of a surreal moment.
Yeah, I bet. So coming back then to You're in Hollywood, you're perhaps not achieving the success you thought you might get, and seeing other people achieving success, and then your life changed. And what was that tipping point?
Well, Philip, I got exposed to yoga through a friend who wasn't a serious practitioner, but he liked the exercise, and he came over and dropped off a yoga DVD by a guy named Rodney Yee, who was a great teacher. And, at that point I was smoking a lot of weed and just having all of these different experiences, which through them I felt connection, quote unquote, or this sense of expansivity, in touch with something bigger than myself. But it's not sustainable, to seek connection through substance. And, you have to come down. So the first time I practiced yoga, I took the final resting pose called Shavasana, and I lied down on the ground and I relaxed and I followed the instruction to surrender, my thoughts and all of this. And I touched a place within myself that was expansive and beautiful and quiet and deep. And it felt like in a moment, that's the thing that I've been looking for. This is something that I want to revisit. And that's what happens in yoga. If you have a good experience, if you have a good practice, a good teacher, you access a part of yourself, which is your inner world. And for me, it was the first time that I'd done that through, nothing outside of myself to contact that space. And it was exciting. So 2 weeks later, I had signed up for a 200-hour yoga teacher training program. And I was stiff. I was really muscle bound from being a college athlete. But I was physical. That made sense to me, how to use my body and express it and to be subtle with it and have some sense of control and refinement. So there's different styles of yoga. Just as a little aside, Philip, there's 4 main paths. One is a physical path of purification. One is more of a mental, intellectual path. And then there's the path of the heart and the path of selfless service or action, which we talked a little bit about. And for Westerners and people like me who were athletes growing up, we're drawn to this hatha yoga, this physical yoga, the yoga that you think about when you think about yoga, because we're familiar with using the body. So I dove in and it changed my life in a big way. I never turned back. I had this quality of discipline from being an athlete who was used to training every day and pushing themselves, beyond themselves. And yoga at a certain point is painful and difficult and challenging in different ways. But I knew how to stick with something. And when you do with yoga, it changes the way you see the world. So it has this kind of inner alchemizing effect, which I experienced by continuing to practice. And then my worldview shifted and I kind of slowly came down from this hyper-competitive, burnt out, masculine machismo to more of a compassionate, kind-hearted, inclusive soul. And that's still a work in progress. I just want to remind everybody or anybody who's listening to this that there's been no completion here. I don't think life resolves into being the perfect version of you. You just learn how to accept yourself more and work with what you've got. And that's a moving target. Every day is different. We take 4 steps forward and 3.5 steps back, and that's triumphant on some levels. We just have to keep going.
So for those folks listening who haven't ever tried yoga, they know about yoga, but they haven't really tried, or maybe they've had a couple of goes. How, is it easy? How would you, if you're just kind of average guy, perhaps feeling overwhelmed, stressed at work, looking for some sort of release or some way of, improving their physicality, their mental state, how do you get into it really?
You'll never regret going to class once class is over. They might say the hardest part of class is just getting there. just getting off the couch or whatever you're doing. See, there's a strong force in the universe, Philip, as you know, called resistance. And when you're endeavoring to do something different or new, this force arises, which wants to keep you from doing. It's like inertia or friction. So you have to fight against that. You have to get up and go. And for me, it's a shame in some way. There's so many yoga teachers who aren't really qualified. I mean, the way to make it professionally as a yogi is to run yoga teacher trainings, which is basically, a few weeks of intense training, and then you get a certificate to teach. But historically, yoga's been around for thousands and thousands of years, and you had to, in many cases, live with your teacher for 30 years before he would even teach you kind of the inner secrets of yoga. So, as a caveat, or just, to share, you got to find a teacher who resonates with you, and it might not be the first one that you meet, at your yoga studio. So my suggestion would be is don't be discouraged, and don't stop seeking, some mentorship or some intelligence if it doesn't work the first time. And there's many different styles of yoga. The style that I teach, called Iyengar yoga, is based on alignment, and you hold the poses for a lot longer, and it's very intricate in its instruction. So somebody who really is detail oriented, who's perhaps even a control freak, would love that, compared to the fast paced flowing movements, which maybe you would love. So different styles, try something new. And again, there's many ways. So the goal of yoga is Chitta Vritti Nirodha, which is the first sutra in the Yoga Sutras, which means yoga is the cessation of fluctuations of mind stuff. So when the mind is rendered quiet, then you start to contact a deeper reality. So whatever it is that allows you to quiet your mind is, in essence, a yoga, but the yoga works on different levels of purifying the body, the inner energetic channels. And in that way, you have more prana. In Chinese medicine, they call it qi, which is life force. But if you practice Tai Chi, Kung Fu, a martial arts, some type of Sufi whirling dervish, sitting meditation, walking meditation, all of those paths are valid. There's many paths that lead to the top of the mountain, many rivers that lead to the sea. You just have to find one that feels like yes for you. And that's what we do at my company, Flourish. We put on these international retreats, and you're exposed to so many different modalities of spirituality and well-being, all of which can work to bring you to this place of inner calm and peace, from which your life would change in a beautiful way. But you got to do something. And just to finish this thought, Philip, you mentioned how there's a lot of awareness about men's issues, about men's psychology, and awareness is good, but there has to be action. Nothing really happens if you're just aware of a problem or a predicament and you don't do something about it. So that's the archetype of the warrior. The magician is aware of the inner workings of those forces which are working for us or against us. And the warrior is dispatched to live out the mission, to go into battle with oneself and the world for the achievement of the highest good. So do it. Just do it is the famous mantra here.
So, I mean, one thing we try and do with this podcast is to, for those guys that are aware that they need to make changes in their life, they want a better life, a happier life, they want to try and combat the whatever challenges they're faced with. I mean, there's going to see your doctor, take a medical route. But for some things, I guess yoga then could be the answer. Then you could start to say, if you're experiencing stress at work or stress in your home life, or you don't feel you're coping, to take a kind of normal, everyday stress. Yoga then, from what you're saying, is something that you could embrace. You have to work at it, but just try it and see what it does for you.
That's great, Philip. What I would say in response to that is yes, and a little bit goes a long way. Sitting meditation, again, there's so many lineages and styles, but there's great teachers. I'm one of them. Not that I'm necessarily great, but I have a lot of experience. But there's gurus like Satguru and different people like Pema Chodron, who's a great Tibetan monk, and Muji. These are people that have big followings, that have great YouTube channels, and you could learn a very simple sitting meditation practice of simply following the breath in, following the breath out. That's the object that you meditate on. And when you notice that the thoughts are tripping into the past or fantasizing about the future, you acknowledge that. You silently say inside your head, thinking, or I know, and you come back to the breath, and you do that 1,000 times in a minute, because the mind is a monkey, and that's just how the mind is. People say, I can't meditate. My mind is too active. I say everyone's mind is active, even the great yogis, but they're just not attached to those thoughts. They can see them passing like clouds. They're aware of them, and they're able to kind of keep coming back to the moment. So if you did that for 2 minutes, I don't have time to meditate. Maybe you don't have time to meditate an hour in the morning and an hour at the night, but you have 2 minutes to sit down and do this thing. And that alone, if you were regular with it, consistency is, I think, more impactful than sitting for one day for 5 hours and not doing it again for 2 weeks. And you would build trust in yourself and a sense of self-respect and confidence, because we make a lot of promises to ourselves that we don't fulfill. And then we, on some level, stop believing in ourselves. And this is good for that too. So yes, simple practices, a little bit goes a long ways. Physical yoga is wonderful. It feels great for the body, and it builds that body, mind, spirit connection. And yoga is for men. I mean, this is a podcast where anybody's listening. So, I've been teaching now for 16 years and hold these retreats around the world, and we probably get 85% women coming. That's changing now because Flourish puts on men's retreats, and I'm holding men's circles every month, and I'm in multiple men's groups, and that's a different thing. But it's calling more men into these spaces, which I'm facilitating, which is great. We just got back from Peru with 20 people, and half of them were men, which felt awesome and powerful. And it's a different type of dynamic in the group, which is really beautiful. So, overcome inertia, show up, try something new. If yoga is not for you, a martial arts, could be the way. I think sitting meditation is really important. It's where you cultivate awareness of what's going on inside your head, and you're able to start to recreate some of the limiting beliefs and thought forms that play out over and over again in your mind. In yoga, these are called samskaras, and the prescription is pratipaksha bhavanam, which means replace the thought, which is negative, with the opposite thought. But first, you have to know what these repetitive negative thoughts are, which is, I'm not enough, I'll never make it on my own, nobody loves me, whatever those are for you. We all have them. You gotta identify those and then fake it till you make it, and take the opposite approach. I'm ugly. Okay, well, look in the mirror and tell yourself you're beautiful, even if you don't believe it. And over time, you'll feel beautiful. And again, that's not easy work. And I understand that. That's why the coaching, working with somebody like me, getting this one-on-one dialogue going to identify your weak spots, to identify your strength, to lean into those, to have a vision for your life, to create an action plan for how you're going to get there. This type of support is important. And that's why I say every man needs a men's group. So what is a men's group? It's a circle of men who gather to learn new skills relationally, how to listen, how to communicate, and how to contact their emotional body, and even distinguish the difference between the thinking function and what it means to feel. A lot of men are cut off from that.
And why do you think, is that increasing in society? the need for men's groups, the need for men to perhaps be together and draw strengths from each other. What are the main causes you see at the moment? What's on the increase?
It's a huge, it's in demand. And when we released the Flourish Men's Retreat last year, which was 4 nights in Northern California at a place called Mammoth Lakes, it's the Sierra Nevada mountains. It's grand and glorious. It was sold out before I even released it. I just called the men in my community, the men in my life, and I mentioned, I'm not going to give it away, but it's possible that we beat the drum and wake you up at midnight the first night, blindfold you, put you in a car, drive you out to the middle of the woods, and have you carry a backpack filled with rocks representing your ancestors to the top of the mountain into some type of ritual ceremony. I don't know if that's going to happen or not. And they're like, sign me up. Yeah, I need this. Men grow through challenge. And the problem that we're up against, and Philip, historically, boys were initiated into masculinity through rites of passage work in all indigenous traditions. And it was the severance of the umbilical cord in some sense, like the breaking away of the comfort that the mother provided by literally removing them and putting them through some arduous task, which when they would return, they would have new responsibilities, a name, an identity as a man, and being part of the community in that way. In 1780 to 1830, the world went through the Industrial Revolution. And for the first time in human history, men left the home, and this really happened in Europe and in the United States, to go to the factory. And that had never happened before. Before then, the father was exchanging teachings through a trade, through work in the field, through the hunt. And the son, by osmosis, had a sense of what it felt like to be a man, what the male mode of feeling and communication was. It was exchanged. And then suddenly the father's gone all day. And since then, boys have been raised by their mothers. And the understanding is that women cannot initiate boys into mature masculine psychology. It just doesn't happen. Girls don't have the same problem because girls raised by their mothers are proximate, close, and around this mature woman all the time. So they have a good sense of what it looks and feels like, the texture of mature feminine. Not that all women are mature, but you understand the predicament. So my father was raised by his mother. His father was raised by his mother. And most men are immature psychologically, which means they're stuck with boyhood psychology. And that means instead of being a generative king who maintains order in the realm of his life, who blesses people, who creates boundaries, and a mature lover who's compassionate and connected to the full spectrum of the human heart, who can feel all aspects of his emotional world. We behave like a high chair tyrant, like a little boy sometimes, and I'm sure, this is familiar for some of those who are listening, who demands that the world bends to his every will. And if things aren't done when you want, exactly as you'd like, then you throw a tantrum. So just being aware of these tendencies and our need to be with elders, to be around men that are wisdom keepers. There's a drought and a lack of men who are holding that mantle of spiritual and mature masculinity. So what do? Well, we need to get together as men, elevate the way we relate, learn what we didn't learn in our developmental years, which is how to feel, how to be vulnerable, how to celebrate other men, and how to express ourselves in healthy ways where we can start to use our words, listen deeply to others actively, and learn many things, like how to apologize, how to be here now in the moment with someone. This would translate into being more effective and more fulfilled in relationship, in work, and really aligning our lives with purpose. this is part of the work that's needed. It's wanted. And if you have a group where you live, or if you need to start one, think about that. Gathering with men outside of the locker room, outside of the saloon and the bar, and elevating that conversation. There's great resources for this too. If, anybody wants to follow up, books, step-by-step processes of how to start your own men's group and what that looks like.
So this is about maturation. This is about relearning what it is to be male, a man, and more about taking control of your own life, reaching fulfillment. And I guess this is all, I think, as you said earlier, this is the foundations of the practice of yoga and thinking around yoga.
The thing about yoga is that it can be a mask. You hear this term thrown around a lot in the spiritual communities, which is spiritual bypassing. Because yoga feels really good and it releases all type of positive chemistry. And you get people, and I was like this early on, where you're literally taking 3 or 4 yoga classes a day. And it's basically like getting high. And as soon as you come down and start to feel that edge of discomfort, then you do your meditation, you do your pranayama, and you kind of bypass the more watery human aspect of yourself. And you identify as, again, it's the flying boys syndrome. The Peter Pan loves spiritual practice because it's up in the stars and it's expansive, but to come down. So in men's work, there's something called bucket work. There's a quintessential text called Iron John, and it's written by Robert Bly, who was the poet laureate of the United States, and he was the leader of the men's movement in the 70s, one of the men spearheading that, which was adjacent to or parallel to the feminist movement. It just got a lot less press. And he wrote this incredible book called Iron John, which was kind of picking apart this Nordic fairy tale to express the rites of passage journey for men as a metaphor. And he talks about bucket work, where eventually a man has to go to the lake where the wild man lives with a bucket and drain it. And you have to imagine how hard and how long it takes with a small pail to empty out a lake. Well, we have to start to empty out our emotional world and go into that. And the way to go into it is to feel. And we do so many things, Philip, as people, men and women, to avoid feeling. We numb through porn addiction, through alcohol, through drugs, through TV, entertainment. I mean, even if you're starting to feel anxious or uncomfortable, you pick up the phone, you start scrolling, you call somebody to have a conversation, but you're avoiding that edge of tension, which you will do anything to not feel. So unconditional feeling. So rather than meditating or practicing yoga, sometimes you just have to sit down with yourself in the restless energy of discomfort and be with that unconditionally as it is, not running away, not flying above. And that is the way through. And that's the path of integrating our traumas and the parts of us which we fear to face. And I think that's the spiritual warrior's work. So in spirituality, you can't avoid anything. And if you are through your spiritual practice, then eventually you're going to have to come down and deal with your humanity.
So for those people listening to this, how do they start on that path? How do they make that a reality? They get home from work, stressed out, need to have something to eat, but how do they start that? And I know you said, we talked about yoga earlier, and you can kind of go online and look at something, but what you're talking about is far more fundamental. It's far more spiritual. How do you practice that if you are a novice?
What's coming up for me is that, a lot of people are addicted, including myself, to comfort. And however you seek comfort, at some point, you have to be courageous enough and vulnerable enough to really honor who you are as you are and start to be more intimate with yourself. Now, the therapeutic approach is a powerful approach. Maybe men resist talk therapy. I've been doing that on top of all of my spiritual gymnastics and practices and meditations and readings. Reading a spiritual text like the Tao Te Ching or the Yoga Sutras or Sufi mystic poetry by Hafiz or Rumi or the Bible would be a great way to turn your attention towards the real, the capital R. And that path of self-study through the scriptures is a path that leads to the realization of the self. It's a valid path to enlightenment. And I think for men and women who haven't contacted the mystical literature of Earth, it's the legacy of the human heart, and it's very transformative. Reading a passage from the Tao Te Ching, which is completely mysterious, alone causes the mind to quiet and kind of break away from mundane thought processes and open up to possibilities. So I would love for somebody who's hungry for change to come in contact with, a text like this. It would be impactful. And again, there's many, and there's modern teachers the same, like Wayne Dyer and Tony Robbins, who maybe is a little bit more worldly approach and perhaps more accessible for some, just to feel that energy. And of course, taking the next step to show up into a public place and seek a practice that resonates with you, again, whether it's yoga, meditation, art making, crafting, ecstatic dance. There's so many ways that we can start to come in contact with deeper versions of ourselves, to get out of our heads into our hearts. And I really believe that community is medicine, and that we come from tribal antiquity. Our ancestors were communal, and we needed each other. It was life and death that we depended on one another, and modern times have set us apart. We've become alienated, and we can definitely hide out behind silicon screens and kind of numb through technology where human beings require connection. So even if you don't want to practice spirituality or read about it or have anything to do with it, get out of your house, go, to a dance class, go to a place where you can connect and have physical contact and exchange ideas and energy and have conversation just maybe beyond what's normal, that slightly more elevated relationship container, and give yourself that gift. You'll feel great to be with other people.
That's fantastic advice. So you've just got to go and do it, I think, as you said earlier. Put down your phone. Don't go to the bar. Don't just sit in front of the TV. Just get up and go and do something. Open a few doors that are maybe uncomfortable for you, but it's out there.
If what you're doing is not working, then you got to do something different. And it might take you years to go and follow through with that instinct that, maybe yoga's right for me. And then you'll get to class. And I've heard this so many times, which is like, I wish I would have started sooner. And you knew it was good for you. It just took you a long time to get there. And that's great. You're there. Don't beat yourself up. That doesn't help. But if you're hearing this message, the call, the universe is speaking through me to you. And we're all one anyways. And that message is, you can, you are worthy, you belong. And if you feel ready for change, then take the next step. Open your computer, find out what's proximate, what's accessible. Yeah, online works as well. There's so many good courses, but I think that human contact and showing up in a physical space is something slightly different. And you also have me. you have all of the things that Flourish does. Last year, we had 6 retreats. We had 2 women's retreats in Valle de Guadalupe, Mexico. We had a men's retreat in Mammoth Lakes. We do something called Paradise, which are week-long retreats in these very beautiful coastal areas. This year, we're going to Lake Atitlan, Guatemala for a week, and that will be stunningly beautiful. We practice 4 times a day, touching all different types of spiritual modalities. And then we have pilgrimage, and pilgrimage is our big trip. A couple of years ago, we went to India for 2 weeks. This year, we went to Peru and explored the Andean range and this incredible Peruvian legacy of earth magic and shamanism. We'll see where we head to this year. I'm thinking potentially Japan, Thailand, but then going into those cultures and those spiritual practices of those cultures with a group and having peak experiences and celebrating and sharing these moments, which make friendships that last a lifetime. We do local events as well. So if any of that feels exciting for you, if you want to dive in through an awesome 5-star experience, then you could visit us at peaceloveflourish.com or on Instagram at beflourish.
And we'll share those links. We'll share those links in the description. Thank you, Patrick. Thank you for sharing your advice, your wisdom with us today. It's been really fascinating. Thanks very much.
You're welcome, Philip. I think you did a great job, brother. I appreciate your work and your mission, and I support you wholeheartedly.
Thank you for listening to the Midlife Men podcast with me, Philip Briscoe. If you want to find out more about Patrick as a yoga, meditation and wellbeing coach, visit patsperrylove.com. To find out more about Flourish and the retreats and the other programs Patrick mentioned, visit peaceloveflourish.com. If you have a story to tell and you think your experience would help others, then please do get in contact with me either via the website mid-lifemen.com or email me at midlifemen01@gmail.com. If you've enjoyed listening, then please do rate and review the podcast. It really helps. Between us, we can reach more people who might benefit from the stories shared by my guests. Finally, there's now a book called Men Speak Up, Journeys Through Mental Health, which is based on stories from the podcast and available on Amazon and from other online bookstores.